Good afternoon. Welcome to YourTown. I'm Thomas Hood, your host. As you know, with YourTown, we communicate with lots of people in the community, movers, shakers, comedians, stand-up comics, you name it, politicians, as a way of starting the conversation on the Monterey Peninsula, and we hope you find it informative and entertaining. Today's going to be really a special show for me. It's kind of fun. I've got a gentleman on. We're going to do a couple of segments with him. Artist, photographer, architect, bon vivant. I refer to him as the Indiana Jones of travel photography because he's climbed the jungles and painted these scenes, and we're going to hear a little bit more about it today. So without further ado, Jeffrey Becom, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Tom.
This is going to be a fast 18 minutes. I don't know exactly how we're going to keep it under control here, but
we'll do our best.
Let's start by just talking a little bit about your auspicious beginnings. We're not in Manhattan painting. They were on a farm in Indiana?
Yeah, we were. Right? I was 10 miles out of a little village in South Central Indiana. Okay. And there are no bookstores. There were no artists making a living. And so there were no real role models I could kind of follow. But I knew there had to be more to the world than the flatlands of Indiana. And so from a very early age, I say, I got to get out of here. I couldn't stand the winters. I couldn't stand the summers. I was born there. I still couldn't stand it.
So you were personification of that old phrase, how are we going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Indianapolis?
Anything.
Or Paris.
Well, or certainly Paris. Yeah. But no, I started drawing and painting from a very early age.
Just self-initiated?
Yes.
Okay.
And I had, the schools had arts programs, but I really didn't get very far with that. They were kind of at a low level.
So you're surrounded by this Midwest landscape. Did you paint, draw?
Yeah, the local rural scenes. That's what was around. And
yeah.
So but the town itself was pretty much built out by 1880. So there were all of these very nice Victorian houses. It was a furniture manufacturing center, so there were really nicely done houses in the area. So that was an important aspect. My great-grandfather came over from Denmark to work in the furniture. He was a cabinet maker. And that's how I ended up there.
Yeah. But your parents weren't in the arts?
No.
Siblings?
My father was a small businessman. He had electronics sales and repair shop, and it grew into a large appliance store that my older brother took over. And I just kind of did what I did, but worked always in the summers at the shop and delivering appliances. So it was not, it wasn't going to get me very far. But I loved to paint, I loved to draw, right. And I did that. I could pretty much replicate anything I saw by the time I was 14.
We were doing the same thing at the same age. My parents weren't artists. Yeah. Great educational system where I was. We had drawing and painting class and things like that, but I was designing houses when I was like 9. I don't know if they worked, but maybe we were doing the same sort of thing. Then you take the leap and you leave Indiana and you end up at University of Cincinnati.
Well, I wanted to be an artist. My parents were sure I was going to starve because, as I say, there were no role models. The only artists they knew were, doing it as a hobby or starving. Yeah. And so they convinced me that I better get a degree in either engineering or architecture. And I thought, well, architecture is a little closer to this, and maybe we can make it work. And so, the closest school to where I was that actually had a reputation that seemed like it would work was the University of Cincinnati, where you worked half the time, went to school half the time for 6 years.
Now that's unique in programs at the time.
Yes.
The only co-ops that I knew of where you'd actually have practical application, I was in the engineering college in another Midwestern state, was in the engineering college, and they were in great demand. The architects were twiddling their thumbs. So we both started working in offices.
Yes,
really
immediately, and I started out with 6 months of drawing toilet partitions for a hospital. It was really horrible work at the beginning, but it got me into
My
the
first job
offices.
was much better. I was doing renderings for a Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired office complex in Lyle, Illinois.
Much better.
I was doing the fun stuff.
No, I had to work my way up. But by the time I graduated, after 6 years of off and on school, I was working at very good firms and involved with people whose work I really respected, and I could hold my own to a certain extent.
So you went to school there, you're working while you're going through school, and you end up your first jobs were right in Cincinnati, and you stayed
Oh,
there?
in Indianapolis, because there was an architect there, Evans Woolen, who did really good work tied to the East Coast School of Architecture, and well respected. And so I'd work there, and then I go back to school in Cincinnati, and eventually, the last year I was in Cincinnati, it rained for 90 days straight. And I said, I'm out of here. I can't take it anymore. Together with that, my school was based on the Bauhaus, the design school, and so I took some classes in photography and printmaking, just some technical classes to understand how it worked. And my focus during that period was on, well, their focus was solely on modernism. That's where they came from. And so I really felt a lack of understanding and knowledge of architectural history. But at the same time, I was really interested in historic preservation and adaptive reuse. And my last year, about year and a half of schooling, they had a thesis project, and I chose for mine, trying to find a way to save the Albee Theater, which was on Fountain Square, which is the center. You do have an image of that.
Let's bring up that image, and let's take a look at that.
This was a 1910 movie palace that was in the center of town, and it anchored a block of historic buildings.
There it is. All right.
It's on the right-hand side in the picture is the first reinforced concrete skyscraper, you'd call it.
And the marquee is original to the building.
Oh yeah, that thing is massive.
You look at that building, and it's like Beaux-Arts with a little Richard Pompadour on top or something like that.
But all of that entire block was historic.
Okay.
And the proposal from the developers was to put a hotel there and tear down all of that corner of the center of Cincinnati, which was all from, the newest building was the Albee from the 1910. And the rest of them were all terracotta clad, beautifully detailed buildings.
And they got scraped for a
Well, the point
precast.
of I said, you don't need to do this. You can build your hotel over the theater. And
we have another image up
I don't
there?
know if we've got that, but it was what it came down to is I designed something that would work to that, and I spent my time appealing to the city council and the planning commission and all of that kind of thing before the city council of Cincinnati.
So you were a young graduate architect, advocate, preservationist all at the same time. What sprung you to California and besides the snow?
Well, what happened was, in the end, after 3 years of delays, they decided to tear down the entire block. And
you left town in disgust?
I did.
Moved west?
I said, there's got to be some place where they're thinking a little further ahead than here. I said, that's it. And so between the snow and the humidity and the lack of forethought in their architectural preservation, I moved to California, to San Francisco initially. And
let's take a look at your next image here. This has got to be some of your California work.
I don't know if it is or not.
Let's see what we got here.
What do we got? Anyway,
so that was.
There you go. Do you know what that is?
This is where you were introduced to color.
Yes, I came to California and I started working at a firm. I had lots of. It was a busy time. I had lots of offers. They were paying me more money than I knew what to do with. One of the first, probably within
Which
the
doesn't happen very often, by the way. So at least you appreciated it.
Well, I was used to working for nothing and working my way through college, and I just save everything every month. That image was of. The first month I was there, I met my wife, my current wife, Sally Aberg, who has degrees in art history and English literature. And the person she studied when she was studying art history was Jablinski, who was with Kandinsky and the other Falvus, who are it's French for wild beasts, because they use color and form in ways no one ever thought to do. And so she introduced me to color. Until then, I was a typical architect. It was all gray.
So you go from the gray Midwest, let's face it, it's white and gray for the most part and gray in the summer, to you come to the West Coast and all of a sudden you're introduced to your future and current wife and color all at the same time.
Yes.
So what happens to your work at this point? Let's see what you got.
It started out as still fairly formal. What I was interested in is I went over, I worked for a short period of time. I did what I thought I wanted to do, which was a custom house right up on top of Telegraph Hill,
I think
up
we've got an
against
image
Coit
of that.
Tower. I think there's a couple of those. It was published. It was very. It was really an interesting project for both me and the architectural community. But I just had conflicts with who I was working with, and there was who was making the decisions. And I,
well, surprise.
I was promised
it's not
to have
you at that tender
yes.
age. This is a shot of this. I remember
Yes.
walking by this building on Telegraph Hill and going, it's a really interesting building, but why did they do it all in stucco? Why didn't they differentiate? And that was part of the...
Yeah, the back and forth. The
back
top
and
of the
forth.
building was supposed to be an entire glass kind of monitor on top, and the part that projected out was intended
I think we've got
to
a
be,
shot of the exterior. Let's pull that up.
was
Because
intended
there's
to be
your
metal.
there's your Bauhausian, Corbusian
Oh, absolutely.
muscles being flexed
Yes.
after being introduced to color. Let's take a look at this next.
And I had
image that we
talked
got.
about this house being painted, and I was shut down. Because I wanted, by that point, I was already thinking, you know, hey, we're a bunch of artists here. We can think about color. And said, absolutely not. So that was one of the things that wasn't working for me.
Let's see the next image here.
Oh, well, so
Okay.
what I did is I said to the person I was working for, then you design it. Because they wanted to make changes to the building, and I didn't want those changes made, and I wasn't in total control. So I said, I'm going someplace where I'm going to do something that I have more control over.
And this what brings you to where you're really introducing color. So were you walking around with a tattered copy of The Fountain in your back pocket? I'm not going to blow it up, but do it your way. I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
All
I did,
right.
and so
that's quite a stand
I
to
felt
take
like
at
I felt like
tender
well,
age of 25.
24.
Okay.
I felt like I was being paid so much money I didn't know how to spend it, and so I put it all in the bank.
You walked away from a high-paying job because
Yeah.
you didn't get your way
Right.
as the intern designer
Yeah.
working for a firm. That's taking a very firm stand.
And so I said, I really didn't get as good an architectural history background in school because it was really focused on modernism, as I said.
Sure.
And I said, so I'm going to go over to Europe and study architecture. I've got all this money. I figured I could last for 5 years after having worked for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so I left. And
Well,
the
let's take a look. I think this is an example of where you did these travels.
The first thing I
Okay.
well
Tell us where is
this is
this? In Central America.
no.
No.
This is all Europe. This is this is North Africa.
All right.
This is someplace that really hit me because by this point I was really interested in color, but I was trying to learn about it as I was going along. This is North Africa. This is Morocco, in the deserts of Morocco, a little village. I would never at that point have thought to put color together the way they were using it. I said, why is this working? How is it working? How are these people who are supposedly primitive so much more advanced than me in the use of color? And so I started...
You didn't want to do all white buildings anymore as you were trained in
Exactly.
undergrad. Okay.
And so I started looking at these, I started walking around and looking at that. Initially, I was studying cathedrals in France, but it got cold there eventually. So I moved to Italy. Well, it was kind of cooler than I wanted to be, so I ended up in North Africa, and that's what's really...
Then when did this book come out?
Well,
How
that came
deep
out
into your travels was this?
after about 12 years. I was working in, I was spending 6 months in Europe and 6 months in back in my studio preparing and doing exhibitions.
Okay.
And
by
so
now, you're not practicing architecture.
I stopped that dead when I went into painting again.
When did you write to Mediterranean Color?
Well, Sally, my wife, and I wrote it together,
Okay.
and that was in 1989. That was an opportunity that presented itself through Harry Abrams' company. It was called
Well,
Abbeville.
that was the first book of yours that I read, and when I referred to earlier about the Indiana Jones of photography or painting is your first chapter was taking you through the jungle to find
And that was the next book. That was
ruin.
down in Central America. But
Oh, it was the second book?
the second book. Yeah,
Okay.
this one
It's
was
a great way to start the story.
Yeah, it was kind of a shock for Sally, I think.
Maya Color, that's the one.
That's the one. That with that one, which was it took 7 years to get the information together. I was really interested in why they were using color when I was in Europe, and that's what we talked about because I didn't understand what was driving that use, and so I started doing anthropological research and talking to people there, but then doing it back home as well. We were living in Berkeley. The anthropological library was right there. I had resources. This was before the internet.
Yeah.
But after Italy, well, after most of these countries joined together in the European Union and the euro took over, prices shot up through the roof, and I could no longer stay in these countries for 6 months of every year and feel like I could afford it and not go in the hole. So started looking for a place closer to home where I could, which was less expensive, that I could actually continue to do that half a year on, half a year off.
So that's about 1990?
1990.
Okay.
What happened was that Italy, where I was usually spending at least 3 months of the year, joined the European Union, and then they went on the euro. Prices went up by 10 times. A place that I was staying in Venice every year went from it started out at $13. It was on the Grand Canal, $13 a night. Went up to $17.50 during the 10 years I was working there. And then suddenly, when the euro came on, it was $175 a night, and they hadn't even washed the floors. I said, I can't afford this anymore. I got to go someplace else. So
you became a starving artist deep into your career at that point.
I jumped ship.
You bolted home.
Well, the one thing that happened as well is that I got the opportunity to do PBS did a documentary where they followed me around Italy from the top to the bottom, and all my favorite little places. And I felt like after that was completed, I'd really done as much as I could there. I needed to give it a break for a while. So I ended up looking in Central America and Mexico. And it took me a while to find out what was going on, to find really what I was looking for. But by the time I got down into Central America, there was this kind of thing going on.
Where is this taken?
Well, that's in Guatemala. It's on Lake Atitlan.
Okay. And that original, you had that on display over at
Museum of Monterey.
Museum of Monterey, and that's, what, 5 by 7?
Yeah, it's
huge.
Yeah, they're big prints.
Yeah.
Again, these look like they're setups. None of them are.
Well, then they have a, and I much overused phrase, they have a painterly quality. It's photography, but it looks like it's paint at the same time. And when I installed your show, I had to walk right up and say, okay, did he retouch? Did he paint this thing?
They're all straight photographs.
Which is remarkable. And
at the same time, I'm doing this
anthropological
research, and this guy's putting a soul into a house. You can't live in a house if it doesn't have a soul.
That was also in Maya Color, about that ceremony and the significance and the size of the house. And
the orientation, how everything has to be working with your community. It's not about individual expression. It's about how do you fit in the community. What is your role in the community, and how you can benefit the community, not yourself.
Which is in some ways, and I could get screamed at for this, but that really isn't an American ideal. About individualism and the temple, as opposed to building in part of a fabric.
Well, not just that, but it's not just your material wealth that you can't have more of than someone else, or you can't have different clothes, or you can't grow different food, you can't eat different food, you can't have different furniture in your house. It all has to be the same as in your community. But not just that, but you can't have more knowledge than someone else.
We're going to continue this conversation in our next segment, but
that was
let's keep it on the arts and stay away from politics.
Well, let's go on.
There's a crossover
so I'm jumping back and forth. What happened was I was taking photographs to use as I was painting while I was in these places initially.
We're going to come back in just a little bit and continue this conversation with Jeffrey Becom. Stay tuned. Thank you.